Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. We're really excited to be talking with one of our friends over from JMT Consulting, Beth Larsen. Wow, Beth, we need like 6 semesters of college time to be talking about this, right? But we're going to
Yes,
be talking about measuring financial success. And we have that in the nonprofit sector. We don't often talk about it, do we?
that's right. That's right.
It's
Yeah,
going to be really interesting to get your perspective on this. I think we mentioned in the green room, now more than ever, we're going to be asked in the nonprofit sector to be communicating this information. What is it? How do we do it? And what does it mean? Beth's going to help us understand. One of the amazing things that we have here every day with us are our amazing partners. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, and of course, Fundraisers Friday, our new episodes dedicated just to fundraisers. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, and I am delighted to be here today with Beth Larsen. Beth is the Vice President of Client Accounting and Advisory Services at JMT Consulting. You can learn more about all their work at jmtconsulting.com. They have a really super cool conference coming up, which we'll talk about later on. But I wanted to make sure that we pointed that out. Beth, you've got a lot going on, don't you, right now?
we do. We do. We have so much going on. We're gearing up for our annual conference in a couple of weeks, but we just have a lot evolving and a lot of volatility among our customer base. So we're just constantly trying to stay up to speed on the ever evolving dynamics right now.
So that's a polite way of saying that a lot of things have gotten topsy-turvy. That's not an accounting term, but I'm going to throw it out there. In the first 100 days of a new federal administration, we've seen a lot of changes. We're now having to reevaluate how we manage our revenue, where we source our revenue. Of course, anybody that is remotely connected to federal funding has seen a lot of changes. And this is not just in the grant space, this is just across the board. It's impacting labor, it's impacting our costs, these tariffs. I mean, it's really causing a lot of consternation. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today is really measuring our financial, I want to say health, but our financial information. And I'm just going to throw this out. I think a lot of nonprofits have not been called to task on this before, right? We've kind of measured some different things, like more around donor revenue. But I want to know first and foremost, what is financial success? Like, it's not just money in the bank. It's got to go deeper than that. And why should we be measuring this?
Absolutely. So, when we think about financial success in the nonprofit sector, while it is different in some respects, it's, I think, articulated differently, if you will, but the measures themselves are um, pretty routine and pretty essential. But when we think about the definition of financial success, that really just means whether or not you have the resources to fulfill your mission effectively.
Interesting.
So, effectively being the operative word, in that, it's about measuring the resources and the assets you have in light of what you want to achieve in
Mhm.
terms of impact. And then the measurement matters because it's the insight. It is the metrics provide the insight we need to make decisions day in and day out as nonprofit leaders.
So, would you add in like the values of risk, which are a little bit more, can be a little bit more nebulous? Like we have, we're paying too much in rent, or we can't find enough staff, or our client base has dropped, or our client base has grown so much we can't serve them. I mean, do we factor in some of these other measurements, even though maybe they're not accounting, but they really, the accountants and the bookkeeper side get us this
Absolutely.
information?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would be hard pressed to find a nonprofit whose resources exceed demand.
Mm-hmm.
So, in most cases, leaders are faced with the difficult decision of having to take a look at their what their mission means to them in their landscape, their external environment, so their service area. I have happened to, over the last 20 years, focus my nonprofit work before coming to the team at JMT in health and human service type organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So that typically means you are providing throughout your service area, those services that are basic needs for families. And when we experience economic volatility in our country, those most vulnerable to that are usually turning up towards nonprofits and coming to nonprofits for services. So you often see this demand exceed what resources you have. So there becomes this, intersection of having to understand what resources you have to do specific work relative to your mission and what does that look like. And so I could talk a little bit more as we go along about what we're looking at and how, but just to kind of close that loop of most oftentimes our demand outweighs the capacity we have to serve or fulfill our mission as
Right.
nonprofits.
I love that you brought that up because I think that client census or that service area census is so important. And I think a lot of times programming measures that, but the other silos of fundraising or finance, other parts of the C-suite, marketing, I mean, depending on the size of your organization, um, that doesn't always get shared or communicated. You can get a sense of
Exactly.
it. You can be like, oh, holy moly. I mean, if you're running a food pantry, you can physically see the people lined up outside your building, right? But, so I mean, it's an interesting aspect of understanding how to measure and I would say what to measure, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So let me move along a little bit because I think this is such an interesting um, aspect of the whole picture. And that is like, talk to us about some of these
Mhm.
best practices. Another thing might be to narrow it down a little bit is like, what should we be measuring? I mean, we're small, we're lean, we're working with, maybe fractional staff. We don't have these like super engines to get us all the information that we want. What should we boil it down at the basic starting point? If you could help
Mhm.
me understand, what
Sure.
should we be measuring? And then how do we grow from there?
Sure. So when we talk about best practices in financial management, and really when you think about any structure or hierarchy, it starts at your foundation. You have to ensure that you have a strong foundation in your nonprofit as it relates to your financial management. So that in our definition, from our definition, looks like having well documented processes and procedures for how you take your financial information into your organization, categorize it, and utilize it to make decisions, and doing so in accordance with the regulations that you need to adhere to. It means having a clear separation of duties between individuals throughout the transactional process of a financial process or a financial transaction. And then how you utilize your technology and the automation that's available to you now to do that well and to do it effectively, and then being disciplined about that level of consistency and how you process so that you have integrity in your financial data. And then you kind of talked about it already, Julia, where you talked about the importance of everything kind of coming together around those mission driven operating activities. Everything nonprofits are doing is they are operating in incurring expenses to carry out their mission.
Right.
And so whether you're at the programmatic level or the development level, you have to have this organized, centralized process for building your budget, understanding where your revenue is coming from in order to cover your budgeted operating activities, and then understanding, which is where your data categorization comes in, and having that strong foundation. And then when you're looking at your budget and what is funded and what is not funded
Mm-hmm.
through the assets that you currently have or anticipate receiving, where are those gaps? So your funded development team can develop a strategy and a plan as you go through the year to talk to donors and your key stakeholders about
Mm-hmm.
where you need money and why. And so it all centers and revolves around really, really good financial tracking and understanding what your costs are and why. And it starts with the data. It starts with understanding the data and organizing the data so it can work for you to lend those insights and provide you with good information to make really good strategic decisions.
It's interesting because um, it's not necessarily what I thought you would say, but I'm I'm hearing from you that no matter what the situation is, I mean, I think for a lot of us, we're having a hair on fire moment.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, no matter what the moment is, we need to be doing this. We need to have these policies. We need to have these procedures, and the foundation then will kind of gird what it is we have to look at. And I find that very interesting because I thought maybe you would have more catastrophic approach, like we're in a
Right.
catastrophe, this is what you have to do. But I really like what you're saying. I think this makes a lot more sense. It's much more sustainable no matter where we are, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And we don't have in the world of finance, we don't have the luxury of necessarily being on fire all the time. We have to, because if we don't have a solid foundation, we will have a fire eventually. And so
Mhm.
it's never too late to start this. We can talk a little bit more about that as we go, but there are some really easy things that you can do in order to um, change your trajectory in terms
Mhm.
of how you're organizing and making sense of where you're currently at and where
Mhm.
you want to be and how you get there.
Mhm. It's so interesting because I think that if you take this approach and you have a strong methodology, it's probably got to eliminate a lot of fear and stress of the unknown. Is that fair to say?
It is very, very true.
Mhm.
I don't know about, I can't speak for others, but I know for myself that when things get busy in life, both personally and professionally, sometimes all you can do is sit back and start to plan and
Mhm.
strategize and organize your task list, because you don't know where to start if you don't
Mhm.
put things in order and try to understand what you need to do next. It's just putting one foot
Mhm.
in front of the other,
Right.
day to day. And, the foundational information is what pulls the rest of our resource allocation together. Understanding, if you take a look at your numbers and you don't understand your financials from the perspective of what percentage of the assets that we currently have are restricted um, for use that may or may not be in our operating budget, what does that mean from a cash flow perspective if
Mhm.
we have all these restricted assets and we can't use them to
Mhm.
cover our operating activities? Then that
Mhm.
that tells us something, and it helps us deploy our resources, whether it be our development team, if we're fortunate enough to have one,
Right.
and everyone in our organization understanding where we have gaps we need to fill so
Right.
that we can or where we need to scale back in order to
Mm.
adjust and course correct.
Right. I think that's a great comment because I think a lot of times, like I've served on boards where we had restricted funds and we had endowment, and I'm thinking back to 2008 with the Great Recession. You know,
Yes,
we
yes.
went, a series of us board members went to the original funders. It was a family with hat in hand, and we said, you know, this is a critical time, and we want to talk to you about releasing some of these funds from the endowment into our general, general operating. It was a fascinating lesson for me,
Mhm.
to be a part of that conversation. And this
Absolutely.
family was like, well, hell yeah,
Mhm.
let's
Yeah.
go. This is a
Yes.
crisis,
Yes.
and what was really interesting is that we worked together, we figured out a solution, and part of that discussion and commitment for that release of funds was a strategy to replace those funds over a period of time. And it kept this organization afloat. And across the nation, organizations like ours, where I served, they had to close up their doors.
Yes, yes. And, I'm glad you said that because I wanted, as I prepared for this conversation today, I did want to raise a similar experience in that through the Great Recession, I was actually in a victim service organization as
Mm.
a program director. And so
Oh,
needed to manage the finances of the programs. And we were facing some really difficult decisions. And if you looked at our statement of activities, our profit and loss across programs,
mm,
our most expensive program with the largest deficit was our emergency shelter. And
yeah,
we actually had conversations with our board that said, boy, if we were to reduce this deficit,
right.
we would be okay.
Yeah,
However, that's where it becomes more about just the numbers, in that
right.
we were the only safe shelter in
Mhm,
our community for people who were
mhm,
fleeing for their lives.
right,
So if
right.
you take that away, and that service meant getting other money in the door, that if we didn't do that, it put other
Mhm,
money at risk. So you
right.
start to see this ripple effect of
Yeah.
needing to really understand the
Mhm,
money you have and what restrictions are affiliated with it, so that
mhm.
you can really make robust, informed decisions as you move forward through tough times.
Okay, so holy moly, I'm going to witness to you. You must be my twin because I served on another organizational board, exactly the same thing. We
Uh-huh.
were a
Uh-huh.
domestic violence shelter. We had just acquired a building and a facility that was given to us by our city. We had to update it, and I mean, it was in horrible shape, and but we needed shelter space, right? And so
Mhm.
we'd gone through all this. We were kind of finishing it up, but not quite. We were still fundraising for it. 2008 happens, and it was brutal because we were like, this is bleeding us dry. We will have to suspend everything if we can't keep going forward with this. But yet we needed it. And it is, I honest to God, it's like gives me chills to hear your
Mhm.
story because this is exactly what happened in
Mhm.
my community.
Yeah.
What we did in the case of that organization as a board is that we went out, again, I use that phrase hat in hand, but we had the information, we had the metrics, we understood the census of what was going on, and we sold the story by saying that in our case, there was data that went throughout the world that said in times of terrible economic crisis, domestic violence goes up. And so we
Absolutely.
projected that we would have an even growing population that needed us, um, that we had to look at the humanity of our decisions and where we could navigate. And honest to goodness, Beth, that saved our bacon.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
That
We were able,
environmental scan is critical. Hmm.
yeah. It was, oh my God, that's just crazy that you would bring that
Yeah.
up. Literally, I've been at that table and it was
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
It is. It is.
Oh, okay, so let's talk about. I mean, we just painted two scenarios that I think we are talking about it is that it's 2008, but it could be 2025. So, what are some of these things that we should be tracking? because I think metrics are important. We're like, oh yeah, we got to have the data, but what should we have, if you'll help us out, at a minimum, so that we can then communicate this to our stakeholders, our funders, maybe even our banker? Where do we go with this? Or where do we start with this? Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's really three essential metrics that you can look at or should be looking at. The first, most obvious, is what are your operating results and in what period of time? So you want to look at those on a month-to-month basis. You also want to look backwards, as far back as you need to look, because that's really going to help you understand cash flow. And usually you can identify patterns of revenue. So most organizations will do a year-end appeal. So their cash influx starts to pick up mid-November and through the end of February usually. And then so you understand these patterns and can plan for months where cash is low, particularly if you have federal or state funding or funding that rolls up to the federal government. What their fiscal year is. There's usually a 6-week pause on payouts. And so even if you have a contract that is monthly reimbursement, there's usually a lag. And so when you look at the months of October and through when those year-end donations start coming in, you have to understand and plan accordingly and figure out how you're going to utilize assets to cover cash. So it's not just if you're doing accrual-based accounting, that's one picture, but your cash is a whole other level of insight that you need to have. And understanding your operating results and your expenses can be helpful in that. And then to go alongside that, it's understanding the cash you have and how much unrestricted cash is available for operating activities to help you get through those dry months, if you will. And, usually you hear a target of 3 to 6 months. We're saying 6. Try to aim for 6. That if you can build a cushion, an emergency fund of 6 months, whether it's held differently, invest part of it, have other parts liquid. That's up to your board to decide and have strategic conversations. But you can achieve some growth on some of those assets if you have 6+ months of reserve. But be thinking about that and have folks around the table that can help inform you of where is the best place to hold your money and get the best bang for your buck, if you will. And then your current ratio is measuring your liquidity. It's looking at whether or not you have the money you need to cover your short-term obligations. And you're taking a look at your current assets there and dividing that by your current liabilities on your balance sheet. And you want to look for a target ratio of 1 or greater.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw a curveball towards you
Sure.
with this. And that is, so if you have an organization that has not been thinking this way, they've basically just been managing their checkbook. Is this something that is going to take like a year to get going, 6 months? I mean, how do we pivot and become more savvy and, dare I say, more responsible in tracking these things? Because I can see where a lot of folks are going to instinctually say, I don't have time to really drill down on some of these things because I'm just putting out fires. So where do we get that balance?
Well, I would come at that as you can't afford not to.
Okay.
That in order to be properly governed and ensure compliance as a nonprofit, you need to have certain tasks that you're fulfilling and responsibilities that you're fulfilling. And one of those is you have a board of directors that meets a minimum amount of times a year. And though that board is fiscally responsible for ensuring that they're reviewing financial statements outside of their consent agenda, which means there's discussion and there's an opportunity for board members to ask questions. And so That's where partners like JMT can supplement your team and provide at a very affordable rate additional support for you to help you get information you need to make good decisions, because we can't do it all. And when we are resource constrained in our nonprofits, that's where you can bring partners in and help strengthen your bench.
So I love that you said that, because I think that's absolutely critical, and we don't have a lot of time left. I want to talk to you a little bit more about communication. I find that sitting around the board table, you're dealing with oftentimes strong personalities, confident egos. They might not always understand what's been presented to them, and they're afraid to raise their hand. So how can we better facilitate that communication?
What I have found to be successful, I spent almost 7 years as a CEO of a regional nonprofit here in Michigan. And what I found to be successful in closing the gap between our operating day-to-day and our board leadership was having a common agenda, ensuring that strategically we are aligned with our priorities, and understanding what it costs to advance those strategic priorities. It is not going to happen overnight, but it starts with conversation, and it starts with priorities around mission and understanding the impact you want to have, the resources you have to achieve that impact, and being realistic about what it costs. And then when we're determining what information you bring to that audience and to each of those conversations, because it might be different depending upon the meeting you're having, whether it's strategy focused or pure business, you have to think as a leader about what you're bringing to your board when, and what more do you need from your team in order to be successful. So it's just about stepping into the proverbial arena and really understanding what your purpose is, why you're there, and make it safe to ask questions and say, I don't know the answer to that, but I will sure try to get it for you, and we'll do our best. And if you can create that environment of safety and security, we can all understand finances and look at a financial statement and have zero context as to what is going on. And there should be no shame in that.
Yeah. I love that you said that, and you're such a calm and thoughtful voice, which is what we need now. And I think it's really interesting that you said something, and it kind of goes along with the strategic planning aspect, is that to communicate that this is a process. Not everything will be decided or confirmed at one point in time, that it's a journey, that we have to be, flexible and use flexible thinking. It's a very interesting aspect, because I think a lot of people are like, nope, the meeting starts at 5, by 5:15, we're going to do this by 5:30. We're regimented to a different standard than actually understanding what the journey is and what the process is.
Exactly. And what you need at that moment in time, because it might look different in January than it does in October.
Right.
And a lot can happen, as we see, in a short period of time, and change the entire trajectory.
Right. We're living it right now as you and I speak. Interesting. Beth Larsen, Vice President of Client Accounting and Advisory at JMT Consulting. I'm going to man up and say Beth Larsen is the person I want on my team when I have the hair on
Likewise. Yes.
Holy cow. Where were you in 2008?
I was leading programs. I was,
I would go from board meeting to board meeting to board meeting, and it was just like, I would be in tears, like between meetings, right? It was so stressful and
impossible decisions ahead of you.
Oh my God, it was crazy. And so this is really cool to have your voice of reason and logic. Wow, what a gift. JMTconsulting.com. You can learn more about Beth and her team and the exciting things that they're doing. And let's really quickly talk about Innovate 2025. It's going to
Yes.
be held in Nashville. I am going to be there speaking and also being part of a panel. What are you going to be doing?
So, oh my goodness, the week of May 5th, we are going to be busy. We're busy leading up to that, but it starts with a pre-conference and goes through Wednesday. Terrific sessions we have, very hands-on. Make sure you bring your laptop. Check out what's available at our website at jmtconsulting.com and go to events. I promise you, you won't be disappointed if you make the investment.
It's riveting. It's all about fintech, but in so many different ways. You talk about leadership, you talk about trends, you talk about technology, cybersecurity, AI changes into our nonprofit sector, and of course with finance. It's really a robust environment of thought leaders throughout the country. Actually, it's international. I was at a table for I think lunch one day last year, and there was a gentleman from Great Britain that had flown
Yes.
over. So, I
Yes.
mean, it's very, very interesting. And I'm excited to see you there, Beth, and anyone else. Raise your hand if you're there and so we can meet. It'll be a lot of fun. Hey, we have amazing partners with us day in and day out on the Nonprofit Show. And they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, and Fundraisers Friday, our new episodes dedicated just to fundraisers. So check us out. Okay, Beth, with somebody like you in our sector, I can breathe a little deeper. I can be a little bit more confident that things are going to be okay.
Yeah, we'll be all right. We'll be all right. We got this.
We got this. All right, everybody. We end each and every episode with this message. Today it means something different because I'm thinking about our financial health and our mental health that we need to use to get to strong financial health. And the message is to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, everyone. See you again.